I forgot to play the music. Doesn't matter.
Yeah, play it. Oh.
Hello. Welcome to the Wednesday live stream on Wednesday. It's really good to be back. My name's Craig. I'm here with Lynn, and
hi, Craig.
I'm feeling a bit rusty, Lynn. It's been a while.
It has been a while. In fact, this is the first time we've seen each other since the last time we saw each other, which I think was back in June, wasn't it? Or May or June.
Yeah.
So we've been texting each other, but we've never actually seen each other. So
We've
you
been in
haven't
contact.
aged very much, Craig. You look just the same. You look younger than ever.
Thank you. It's the video. It's the video. You look great too. You look exactly the same. Well, for people who don't know us, my name's Craig, and I'm an English teacher, and I write material for mansioningles.com, where you can study English for free. We also have a podcast, which is weekly, and that will also help you improve your English. I do that with my good friend and co-host, Reza. And you can find that at inglespodcast.com or wherever you listen to your podcasts. And Lynn is also a busy English teacher.
I am. And Put It Like This is my business. Putitlikethis.com is my website. I'm mostly an online teacher, and I kind of specialize in tailor-made courses. So what I like to do is, I think different students have different needs in English. Some people maybe want to do an exam. Some people just want to do general English for traveling. Some people want to do business English. Some people want to learn how to write properly in English because it's not a skill that they use very much. Or they might want to improve their listening skills. So basically, depending on what your needs are, I try to design a course to fit those needs, to help you fulfill your goals and objectives. If you go to my website, putitlikethis.com, I give you some examples of the kinds of courses that I do. I also do some teacher training courses and training for English teachers, so CLIL teachers, if teachers have to teach their subject through the medium of English, but are not originally English teachers, and I can help them with that as well. So if you go to my website, you can have a look and find out more about me.
Okay, and I have a new website. While I'm telling you about that, Lynn, I have a feeling that your sound's not coming through this microphone. Could you quickly check that you've got that microphone active?
Course. I can.
So I've been very busy over the summer with this website, EnglishCraig.com. And if you go there, you'll see that I do conversation classes, group conversation classes. If you are interested in improving your fluency, your confidence when you're speaking English, then you might be interested in joining me and a small group of lovely people. We meet on Zoom and we basically do discussions, debates, role plays, and other interesting activities designed and focused on improving your speaking and your fluency. So if you are interested, you can contact me through the website. I'll also give you my email address a bit later, and it will be lovely to have you in one of my conversation groups. Say something, Lynn, so we can check.
Well, I've just checked mine, and I do think also that you sound a bit funny, Craig. So maybe you need to check your settings too. Mine seem to be in order. But if anybody's actually in the live stream, maybe you can tell us if you can hear us properly or not.
I've definitely got my correct microphone activated, so I should be okay. Am I low or
no? You're quite high. I mean, I can hear you, but you sound a bit echoey. How do I sound now? Is it the volume maybe, or my microphone here?
You sound echoey. Do I sound better now?
I sound echoey. You sound, yeah, I think so.
Do I sound better?
Yes, I think so there. Okay. Reduce the mic background noise and see if, does that sound better now from me?
No, you're sounding the same. I think I've got a feeling you've got your webcam microphone activated, not your headphone.
Haven't. Well, according to the settings, I haven't.
Okay, so
sorry about that.
No worries. It sounds okay. I can understand you. Let's carry on as we are.
Let me try again. You do the introduction, Craig, and I'll mute my microphone and just I'll disconnect it and connect it again, okay?
Fine, no problem. Now, if you're watching, I know some of you are watching, you haven't said hello. So if you're watching us, please say hi in the chat and tell us where you're from. Obviously, we're having some teething troubles here, some teething problems, because we haven't done this for quite a while. So we're just getting back into the swing of things, getting used to it again. Today, we're going to talk about news. How you listen to your news, if we can trust the news. We'll look at some vocabulary and we'll help you with your English, focusing on news and news stories. Most people talk about the news, whether they're talking about international news and problems, things going on in the world, or even national and local events inside their country or in their area, or just things that your friends have been up to, things that your friends, your family are doing on a day-to-day basis. So we're going to look at all of that today and help you with some vocabulary that comes up in this context.
Here I am again. Do I sound better now?
Oh, music to my ears. That
Is that
sounds
better?
What did you do?
Well, it said that I was on the right microphone, but I disconnected it and connected it again, and then it seems to have connected to the right one. So maybe I don't know what was going on.
You've got rid of the echo. You sound much
there you
better.
Go. So there's good news, isn't it? That's good news.
So people are saying hello. There are people out there, even though we
Great.
haven't done this for a while. Yolanda from Chile, good to see you here. Hernan.
Hello, Yolanda.
Hi. And Alex is back. Hello, Alex. Good to see you.
Hello, Alex.
It's been a while. Hope you're all well and happy, and you've had a good summer if you're in the Northern Hemisphere. And if you're in the Southern Hemisphere, you're just starting your summer. So have a good one.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Well, there's been a lot in the news lately, hasn't there? So, but we thought we'd start off with looking at some vocabulary that generally goes together with the word news. Lots of collocations here. So we've got a few things here. The first one is a one that lots of Spanish speakers get wrong, because the latest news is, if you're a Spanish speaker, it's las últimas noticias. And many people say the last news. Have you had that mistake a lot, Craig?
Yes, definitely. Also problems with news itself. Before we look at the collocations, maybe we should remind you that news has an S, but it's a singular uncountable noun. So we talk about a piece of news or some news. Yeah. Now in Spanish and other languages, it's plural, but in English, remember, it's treat it as a singular, uncountable noun.
So we say the news. Oh, I have some news, and we say the news is bad, not the news are bad. The news is bad. So it has to be obviously followed by a singular verb, but it's uncountable. But if you want to make it countable, then you can always add a bit of or a piece of, which is a common trick for uncountable nouns if you want to make them countable. Exactly. Okay, so we go back to the collocation. So the latest news means the most recent news, if you like, the latest news. And then maybe you've seen on TV breaking news. And breaking news is the news that is really recent. So they've just discovered it, and the journalists are putting it out on the television or on the radio or on Twitter or on social media. And that's called breaking news, because the story is just beginning to unfold. So it might not be complete yet. With breaking news, usually you just get a headline and you don't get very much detail, but that's breaking news. Craig?
Old news. It's old news. It's past. It's gone. It's in the past now. That's another collocation. Obviously, you could have good news and bad news. Usually these days in the media, it's only bad news. That's fantastic news is something you can say to a friend who's just given you some really good news. I'm getting married. Oh, that's fantastic news. I've just got a promotion at work. Oh, what fantastic news. What marvelous news is another one.
And then we have some other positive adjectives that can go with news. Heartening news, which means it's the news makes you feel good about the world. It makes you feel positive about the world, optimistic about the world. That is very heartening news. It makes you feel better. So that's a nice one. Interesting news, I think, is self-explanatory. Most of you will know what the word interesting means. It's of interest. Welcome news. You say, oh, that's welcome news. Maybe you've been expecting some news, maybe about a birth. Maybe one of your friends is expecting a baby, and maybe it's been a difficult pregnancy. And then when you finally get the news that everything is all right, you say, oh, that's really welcome news, because it's news that you've been expecting and you really like it.
Gallo's checking something. He's asking, do I have to say the good news is? Yes.
Yes.
Because the verb must agree with that singular uncountable noun. So the good news is that my cousin's just had a baby, for example.
Absolutely. It's very counterintuitive, that, isn't it? Because you see the S on the news and you want to use a plural noun, but it's a singular noun.
Yeah, it's
it's an uncountable noun, and it uses a singular verb.
Exactly. It's a common mistake. So we've had some positive collocations with news. Let's look at some negative ones. We've got shocking news, which is negative. It's usually bad news. Distressing, terrible news, and depressing news, which unfortunately is what we're seeing today most of the time, and unwelcome news, the opposite of welcome, unwelcome news. So all of those words collocate very nicely with news.
And I think it's more elegant, isn't it, to use some of those adjectives than just to say good news and bad news.
Yes, make sure you vary your vocabulary. Use a variety of different adjectives with news. Now we're going to look at some maybe more advanced vocabulary items with you. But before we do that, while we do that, we've got a question for you. Where do you get your news from? Now, there are lots of different ways to get news these days. When I was younger, it was usually the newspaper and the TV. Those were the only two news sources. Oh, and maybe the radio. But these days, there are many, many places we can get the news from. Where do you get your news from? We'd like you to tell us that by writing here in the chat and tell us where you get your news from. So shall we look at, while you're doing that, shall we look at some more words?
Well, maybe, okay, go on.
Yeah, no,
yeah,
yes,
these
no.
Yeah, because this is some words that maybe if you didn't know how to say where you get your news from, maybe these words will help you, and then you can tell us. Because these are some words that describe sources of news, really. So Craig was saying that in the past he used to get his news from newspapers, newspapers, magazines. That kind of media is called the print media because it's printed on paper. Many years ago, I used to get my news from, I never really liked reading newspapers because they took too long and you had to buy one and all of that. But I was always interested in the news. And so for many years, I used to buy the news magazines. Can you remember the news magazines? I mean, Time magazine is still around.
Newsweek.
And there was also one called Newsweek. But I think Newsweek closed, didn't it?
I don't know. Did it? Did it go
Yes, I think it did. I think, or it might
only
maybe it only went online or something like that. But I used to get Newsweek and I used to subscribe to that. And that was kind of like a roundup of the news every week. So in one magazine, I could spend all week and I had all my updates on the world news. But those, of course, the print media is a source of news that's disappearing now, isn't it, really? Because a lot of it has gone online.
Yeah, and those magazines used to focus a lot on analysis, didn't they? They used to summarize the week's news and give you, hopefully, although I don't think it ever is, an unbiased view.
Well, they used to give you different views. I remember that, especially Time magazine. Sometimes they would take a topic and they would have different articles written from different points of views. So it was quite nice because you got an in-depth look at the topic. and it was all together.
Well,
And it
sorry
was
to
definitely with analysis. Yeah.
sorry to interrupt, Julian. I'm just checking on Wikipedia. Newsweek has been sold and bought by various news conglomerates or huge news companies, but it's still in print.
It is still in
It's
print.
still
Oh,
in
okay.
print, and it's also online at newsweek.com. So it's still
Oh,
around.
okay. So it is
Still
still around, but it's not as popular, is it? Before Time
No.
and Newsweek, you used to see them on all the newsstands. Now you still see Time magazine, but the Newsweek is not so common. And then there's also, of course, radio news, which has been around even before, well, for a very long time, not before the print media, but it's been definitely before online news. And of course nowadays many people get it through social media, don't they? Through Twitter, through online news outlets like BBC or The Guardian or whatever, through the telephone.
And Alex is saying that it's very hard to find a reliable source of news these days. That's true, Alex. The concept of fake news is
Very much in trend.
very
Or
much.
no, the concept of fake news is very common, I think you would say, Alex. Is very common, not in
Yeah.
trend.
Yeah, or has become a popular trend, perhaps.
Yeah.
We'll look at the
We're going
idea
to
of
look at that
fake news a bit
shortly,
later.
Alex. Yeah. We've got that.
Yolanda says, I basically watch the TV news programs to know about what's going on. So, Yolanda, do you vary the channels you watch on the TV, or do you always watch the same channel? I'd like to know that. Paula says, TV, social media, no S on media. Media is a Latin plural. The singular is medium. So the medium of newspapers, for example, or the print medium.
So you need to say social media, Paula, because there's lots of different types of social media. And you've put here as well, Craig, primary and secondary sources. Would you like to explain that?
Primary and secondary sources. Primary source would be somebody in a particular position to give you news. Maybe somebody who's working inside the government or inside an organization that can, there's an expression in English, give it to you straight from the horse's mouth, which means directly from where the news is actually happening. Maybe you get somebody, a news source in the White House or a news source in the British Parliament or a news source in Barcelona football team, and they tell you exactly what's happening. The secondary news source would not be so direct. So you're maybe getting the news reported to another media outlet or another media source, and then it comes back to you. So it's not so reliable, but it is a news source.
And sometimes it's a grouping, isn't it, of other news sources. And primary sources sometimes are referred to as well as first-hand accounts. It means that if it happened to me and I say it, that's a first-hand account. Another way to say that is an eyewitness account. It means that I have seen it personally. And then we also have two other sort of collocations. Live reporting, that means reporting which is happening in the instant, immediately as the news is happening. And again, we have breaking news. We had that before in the collocations. And breaking news is the news that is very, very recent, and it's not fully analysed, but they're just saying directly what is happening as far as they can see.
Yeah, Paula's also saying that in the past, subscriptions to magazines like Reader's Digest. I remember Reader's Digest.
Yeah, me too.
Was that a news source? I thought they were fiction stories mostly.
Yeah, Reader's Digest was, as far as I know. I mean, I don't know where Paula's from, but in Britain, certainly, Reader's Digest used to be sort of fictional, didn't it? It was like little short stories or little accounts. I think there was some letters to the editor and things like that.
Yeah.
But it wasn't sort of contemporary news. It wasn't international news or national news, nothing like that. But it was news of a sort. It was accounts from other people of certain things. That's true. But it is true that in the past we used to have subscriptions more to magazines. I think that's fallen off a little bit now with online. People go for the cheap news, don't we? Because on the online it's free. So a
Well,
lot of it
you
is.
you say that, but I've noticed lots of subscriptions to things like the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Guardian, AP. I think you have to subscribe or at least give your email address to get access to
Yes.
news stories.
Yeah,
So
that's
some are
true.
free and some are
And
paid.
some are not. Uh-huh.
I'm really pleased, Yolanda, that you do go to more than one channel. I think it's a good idea
Mm-hmm.
to get a balanced view
Mm-hmm.
of the news from different TV channels because
Mm-hmm.
TV channels, like newspapers, have their own agenda.
Mm-hmm. And when we were talking about this, though, before, I realized it was something that I hadn't really been fully conscious of, yes, up to now, really. Maybe it's just because I never thought about it and I'm a bit stupid. But I think I realized that the news that we see on the television often is totally without analysis, isn't it? So it's just sort of spurting, which means like kind of vomiting out
Yeah.
like information, supposedly facts, yeah, that they find, somebody tells them a fact, an eyewitness account, a first-hand account, some live reporting, and they simply describe what they're seeing usually. But it's true that in the newspapers and in those magazines like Newsweek, there was more analysis of what they were. You find more analysis of what's going on. You don't have just sort of um, descriptions, really. And of course, nowadays in the news, because of TV and social media, especially with videos and images, a lot of the time now we get something which we haven't written here, but it's something called sound bites of news. Can you pop that in the chat, Craig? Sound bites. And sound bites is when people have recorded something on video, but they choose just to broadcast a very small piece of a whole. And often with a sound bite of news, you don't get the full context. Sometimes you don't even get the full sentence of what somebody has said.
It's taken out of context. Yeah.
And it can be very disruptive, that kind of news, because it can really influence you and you haven't actually heard the whole story.
Exactly.
So
That's a
you
problem.
think you're hearing fact, but you actually aren't.
Some more comments are coming in.
Yolanda
It's
has a,
lovely, lovely to
mhm.
see so many people joining us on our first live stream for a
Yeah, that
while.
is nice.
Hernan David says social media is my source
Source of
of
news.
news, not its, but is my source of news.
That's a common mistake, Hernan, for Spanish speakers. Sometimes you're trying to repeat the noun. So the noun of the verb is social media. And what you're trying to do is then say social media, it is. But remember, the it is social media. So you don't need two subjects in English, only one. You say social media is my source of news. I've picked that up. It maybe, Hernan, it was just a typo that you did. But I just picked that up because I'm marking a lot of writing at the moment. And lots of Spanish people make that mistake. So I thought I'd highlight that one.
Speaking of typos, I've made a typing error, a typo. I've put eyewitness as AYE, an eyewitness account. No, my spelling is not correct. It's EYE. It's not AYE.
Okay. I
It sounds
didn't
so.
notice.
Maybe that's an account from a pirate.
Mm.
I, and I.
Yolanda has asked, though. She says, what is an eyewitness account exactly? So a witness is somebody who is present when something happens. So they have seen it with their own eyes. And so an eyewitness account means that this news or this story or this account of facts or of what has happened has come from somebody who was in the moment there when the news happened. So, for example, at the moment, of course, I think we all know all around the world, the news that is flooding us all now is the terrible situation in Palestine and Israel, the Middle East, basically, with all this terrible violence that's going on. And there have been on the news many eyewitness accounts of people who were in a certain place at a certain time where the violence was happening, and then they have reported what they saw to a reporter who has then published it in the newspapers or on the television. And sometimes on the television you see recorded interviews with eyewitnesses, people who were there at that moment, and then they're being interviewed. That gives more credibility to the story, of course, if you have an eyewitness account, because it's more credible, it's more believable. Mm-hmm.
And speaking of which, news being believable, our second question for you is, can we believe the news? Whether you get your news from social media, from the newspaper, from different TV channels, is it reliable? How do you know that the news you're hearing can be trusted? What do you think about that? What's your view on that? We'd be interested to know your opinion. Is the
First of
news...
all, while they're writing, while they think it's reliable, I didn't ask you, Craig, where do you get your news from? Usually.
I, like Yolanda, I watch different news channels. I try to mix the news I get, and I find it very interesting to see the difference in the way the news is reported. So I'll watch the BBC, I'll also watch Al Jazeera, I'll watch CNN, and I'll watch Fox News. And you
Oh,
get
really?
yes, because
very different accounts.
we'll talk about this a bit later, but if you only watch the news from a political perspective that is yours, you're getting a very biased reinforcement of your political views. It's always good to see the other argument. It's always good to have two sides to the same news or problem. So I like to vary, but I also get my news from social media, from Twitter, which is now X, not from Facebook, but I do look at Twitter for news, and for videos I look at YouTube for analysis, for people analyzing the news on YouTube. And I also look at TikTok occasionally, because
Really? Wow.
eyewitness news is on TikTok quite a lot. So you mentioned the war in Gaza. There's lots of eyewitness video accounts of what happened in Israel on the 7th of October, and also what's happening now in Gaza. Eyewitnesses there taking short videos with body cameras.
Oh, goodness. And I'm scared of watching things like that. But is it?
But there's nothing. There's nothing really. They don't publish things that are that shocking. We had that word before, shocking news. I haven't seen. I know there are some, but I haven't personally seen any really shocking videos about that. Where do you get your news from?
Because that's what I'm worried about with YouTube. I'm a bit afraid, because I don't want to be distressed by the news. I do like to have some kind of mediation of the news, I have to say. But you are absolutely right. It is important to look at different opinions. And I've often noticed that too, that when I have varied my news sources, my own opinions have begun to change. And it is true that you need to vary them, I think, because otherwise you do just reinforce the same thing all the time. But I like analysis. So I do like reading things that are longer in length. So I used to like Time and Newsweek magazines, but I have to say, I stopped my, this is an anecdote, but I stopped my subscription to Newsweek, and I had been subscribing to Newsweek for many, many years, and I stopped it.
Why did you stop?
Many years, for a specific reason, and it was because on the front page, they took a photograph. They had a photograph of somebody who was about to be executed. and this poor man had a gun to his head. And it was a very shocking photograph on the front of the magazine. And then in the magazine, in the article, the next photograph of the man was dead. He'd been shot. And I was so distressed by seeing that.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt it so disrespectful to the poor man who had lost his life to be spread across the world like that. And I felt that that was really sensationalist. And in protest, I haven't done many things in protest, but in protest, I cancelled my subscription and wrote a complaint letter.
When was this? How long ago?
It was a long time ago. It was in the 90s. But I was so distressed by it. Of course, now it's nothing because it happens all the time on social media. You can't even control it. You can't even write to anybody and say, that is not respectful, what you're doing. But
True.
I do, unfortunately, nowadays, a lot of the news is very sensationalist. And I appreciate that a picture can be full of impact. There's been some famous pictures, hasn't there, of that poor Vietnam or Korean girl who I think she was Vietnamese, wasn't
Vietnamese,
she?
yeah, running from the bomb.
Running from the napalm bomb. And that was a photograph that changed apparently the course of the war as well, because it changed public opinion about America's influence in involvement in the Vietnamese War, and then it changed the course of history. So I do appreciate that some photographs can be very powerful and can give a message. But I felt that photograph of the execution just went too far. For me, it was too far, and it was too disrespectful to the human being, you know. So I really didn't like that. So that's when I cancelled my subscription.
Well, I don't blame you. Some of those images are terrible.
And that's what makes me scared about the videos on YouTube. But there again, maybe I need to be a bit stronger.
Really pleased to see Eva here. Hi, Eva. It's been a long time since we spoke. Eva, really good to see you here. And she says, TikTok, ooh, real people then. Yeah, because I think you need a balance. And I think as much as I appreciate news institutions like the BBC and CNN, etc., I think also on the spot reporting, people who are actually there. And I do take what I see on TikTok with a pinch of salt. If you take something with a pinch of salt, then you're a little bit suspicious. You don't immediately believe it. But I think it's a good idea to get as many viewpoints from as many sources as possible.
I think you're right.
Gallo's asking what biased reinforcement is. To reinforce something is to go back over it again and say it again. And if it's biased, then it's one way or the other. It's not fair.
It's prejudiced. It's not neutral.
It's not neutral. It's not fair.
But Gallo there, bias, Gallo. Just be careful there with the spelling because it's BIASED. Bias, BIAS. Okay.
What does Yolanda say here? For me, I give more credibility to TV channels, BBC, CNN, Fox, New York Times, or a few similar newspapers. While Instagram, TikTok, I don't feel sure about their credibility due to fake news. Yes.
Yeah, I know where you're coming from there, Yolanda. I have a similar suspicion about it. But on the other hand, I have to say, even with BBC that I've been reading for years and years and years, sometimes I get a little bit disappointed as well, because I think sometimes BBC, I think it's the way news has evolved, and a lot of the news, especially the breaking news, often is very unsubstantiated. Yeah, they seem to make news, but it's not really credible as such. And that's a problem that I have with those 24-hour news channels. They're in such a hurry to get the news out that they don't think. And sometimes the first news that is out there is not necessarily the right way to formulate the news, I think. And I think all of them, CNN too, Fox, New York Times, it's because they went from having a more reflected approach to news to suddenly there's a lot of pressure to be the first to get the news out there. And that that causes problems. Sometimes, especially with the breaking news, they start with a headline, and then the rest of the news article is pure speculation. Yeah. Have you noticed that? It's all speculation, and there's no fact there.
Talking about the future. Now, these channels like the BBC, CNN, Fox, we can classify those as mainstream media. Mainstream media, I think part of the problem is that they've really turned into entertainment channels, and they're concerned in keeping our attention rather than just giving us the news. And more I'm noticing these personal stories that you see about one particular family or one particular person that dramatizes everything to keep people watching. I don't think that's necessary. Just tell me what's happening and quote your sources. Where are you getting the information from? So let's look at some more vocabulary, shall we?
Okay.
Speaking of news, we've got credible news. We had that word before, credible. Things that you believe are credible news sources. And I've noticed on the BBC now that they've got something called BBC Verified.
Verified, yes.
They've checked it. It's true. You can believe me. Please believe me. It's verified news. It's verified sources. And the opposite is unverified, when you cannot say that it's true.
But to be fair to the BBC, when they started to do that, very recently, particularly with the Gaza war, because there was a lot of propaganda. That's in the bottom line there of the vocabulary. There's a lot of propaganda going around. So a lot of the news that they were getting, even from government sources, was maybe not always sure that it was true, and so somehow they decided that they had to start verifying it. But maybe it started also in the Ukraine war, I think, actually, with the BBC verification, because I seem to remember also seeing it from behind, or maybe even with COVID. But they tried to corroborate with satellite imagery to see that the photograph is real, because there's a lot of falsification of photographs now. And I think also maybe with the impact of AI, it's so easy with AI to manipulate voice, images, pictures. And so they have to be really sure. They're trying to use different sources to say that the news is correct.
Yeah.
So they are making an effort. And that is reassuring, of course, I think. If it's correct, if we can believe it, but I don't know. You have to
verify it.
I think we have to trust it. At some point, we have to trust, because we have no means of verifying, have we?
We've got to trust I think if the institutions are trustworthy, then we can trust in them. But as you say, there's so much fake news on the internet that eventually we're not going to be able to believe any picture, any video. It's all going to possibly be created by AI, which scares me a lot. We're not going to know what's going on. But speaking of that, what's the difference between misinformation and disinformation? Got two prefixes there that change the meaning of information. What's the difference? Disinformation and misinformation.
Well, you're asking the students out there.
I'm asking anybody who wants to tell me. I Googled it, so I know. I wasn't sure before this, but I've got the answer here. Misinformation is false information, inaccurate. So it's not accurate, and it's spread and it's put out into the world without any harmful intent. So there's no malice. There's no bad intention.
It wasn't deliberate. It was accidental, possibly.
Yeah, it's just wrong. But disinformation with D is deliberately false information, and it's intended to deceive you or mislead you and fool you. So disinformation is worse.
Well, it's like disinformation is like hoaxes. Hoax is a deliberate false piece of news. Propaganda is deliberate. Uh-huh. Is to try to make people follow certain political parties, and it twists the information in order to attract people. So that is clearly disinformation, propaganda, hoax, or fake news. I think everybody knows the name fake news now. That word seems to have gone into other languages too, doesn't it? Fake news.
Yeah. Yeah. Fact checking, you've got to check your facts. And I think journalists need at least 2 verified sources before they can call it a reliable news source and actually publish it as news. They need 2, don't they? 2 sources.
Yeah, I'm not sure how many, but I assume they do. Yeah. And then we have the critical eye. Now, this is a concept. We put it there as vocabulary because we talk about using your critical eye when you hear news. If you have a critical eye, obviously eye here, it means that you're looking very carefully and you're looking to try to establish whether the news is credible or not. And you're evaluating whether you can believe the news or not. And I think that is possibly in the past, people didn't need so much of a critical eye with news. Yeah. I mean, I have no doubt that the news wasn't completely true that people heard in the past, because it was kind of controlled and it was a very nationalistic news that you got given through the radio or your newspapers in every country. It was very country oriented. But now, of course, with the internet, that we can get news all over, that has generated all this fake news, and we now are having to exercise our own critical eyes to try to figure out what can we believe or not.
And that leads on to critical thinking that we'll talk about in a second. But I just want to show you Roberto's comment, speaking of fake news, because back in the day when Donald Trump's fake news was because news would be the uncountable noun, so not were, but was persistently heard. Made me have doubts about American news channels. Yes, the Americans are sadly losing a lot of faith in their news institutions. It's a lot worse over there than it is here in Europe, I think. So I'm not surprised. And a lot of people who voted for Trump, in my opinion, are saying, yeah, we know it's fake news. Yeah, we know, we don't care. We don't care, because they're so fed up with the political system before Trump that they would do anything to change it. So even though they know that he spreads disinformation and fake news, I don't really think many of them care, which is really sad.
And that brings me to a point, actually, when you said that, when Roberto said that he started to doubt the news because he saw that there was fake news and people were believing it, and it was persistent. And I like your use of the word persistent, because I was thinking about that too. You mentioned earlier that a verified source has to have 2 sources, or a credible source. And this is a problem with our news now, because if you forget news channels and you just think about on a friendship basis, like, we also hear news from friends and family, but we don't believe even our friends and family all the time, do we? Because, you might have the friend who exaggerates a lot. So, you take it with a pinch of salt. Or you might know you have this family member who is very extremely politically oriented in one direction, and you might be of a different leaning. So you choose not to believe totally what your uncle or your aunt says, even though they're your family and they might be trustworthy people. So even in our own circle, we exercise our critical thinking all the time. But the problem when it comes to news is, I think a lot of us have kind of believed or assumed that if it's in print and if two people say it's there, that it's kind of to be believed. People mistrust the TikTok videos because it's just one person saying it. Yeah. But really, of course, it's nonsense, because on internet, we know they get these bots, don't they? And they bombard your social media with the fake news. So the fake news could be repeated by hundreds of sources, but
That's
that
why
doesn't
that's
make it
why
true.
that's why credibility is so important. And if a news outlet or if a news source is credible, then that's the most important thing. Once that credibility has been lost, then you don't trust it. It's gone. The trust disappears. I want to credit Roberto on his use of persistently heard, the adverb. That's very good
Very
English. Well
nice.
done. Very
Yeah,
nice English.
absolutely.
So I wanted to talk about critical thinking. What is critical thinking? How can that help us make good decisions about the news? If a person who thinks critically is constantly questioning and analyzing and evaluating information to make sure that it's true, so they're cross-referencing, they're looking at the credibility of the information, where it's coming from. So if you're thinking critically, then you're always balancing, oh, hang on a second, I heard this, let me check here, what does this source say? Is it true? I've seen this TikTok video. Now I'm going to go on Twitter. Now I'm going to go on the BBC just to check that what I'm reading, what I'm hearing is true. That's critical thinking. Then analyzing the information that you're getting. There was a question connected to critical thinking. Here it
What
is.
is
What's
the
the
role?
role of critical thinking? Well, I've just answered it, haven't
You
I?
just answered that yourself.
There you go. Yeah. Silly me.
Yeah. Okay. So,
Although
but what? Go on.
I was going to say, because you mentioned news from family and friends, so maybe we'll go to this one. Do you always believe news from your family and friends? Do you, Lynn?
It depends on who they are and what the news is.
Credibility. That's it.
No,
if
it's
they've
not
never
credibility.
if
It's
they've never
critical
lied
thinking.
to you, but if they've never lied to you, why would you disbelieve? Why would you not believe them?
Because I think also there's a difference in news, like as well. There's facts about things that have happened.
Yeah.
Yeah. Things that they've seen, eyewitness accounts of what has happened. And then on the top of that, there's analysis, isn't there? There's an opinion about what has happened. And I think with your family and friends, I trust my family and friends that they wouldn't lie to me most of the time. Yeah. I mean, okay, I get little white lies now and again from my daughters, but you hope that your family and your friends don't lie to you. So I have, for example, more faith in my family and friends not lying to me than I do the BBC, for example, right? Because I don't know who the people are in the BBC.
But they still have credibility.
But they have credibility because obviously they're there. But it depends on the factual level. I think on the factual level, it's pretty easy to establish whether it's true or not. Okay, because I mean, with the news sources, we've said you get verified news, etc. Or you can cross check, and if it's your family and friends, probably they're more credible, so you believe them. But it's about distinguishing what is fact and what is opinion. And I think with news, we always generate an opinion about it. And
yeah.
And the opinion is not fact. The opinion is opinion. So it's not a question of whether it's real or not. It's a question of whether you agree with it or not. And I think often we don't make the distinction. We don't make the distinction between fact and opinion. Yeah.
That's very true. But our opinions are pretty much based on our political perspective, on how we were brought up, on our general beliefs. So we interpret any news outside of our friends and family. I'm not talking about day-to-day stuff. I'm talking about world news. We interpret that from our own perspective. And because every news outlet or every news channel or newspaper or whatever has a particular agenda politically or whatever, or maybe they're trying to please their advertisers, they always have a way of presenting those facts to you. Now, you might find that the facts are true, but the way they present them to you, the way they tell you, or the things they don't tell you, is very much affected by their agenda, what they want to put out into the world.
And I think it also depends on your own perspective about why you're interested in news, because probably I think I'm sure I'm a mixture of these reasons, but one reason to be interested in the news is to confirm your own beliefs, to give you confidence that you're doing your life properly.
That's confirmation bias.
Yeah, that's confirmation bias. But there's another side of wanting to have news, and that is to try to educate yourself and to try to form opinions about things that you know nothing about. Probably we all have a mixture of those motives when we are consuming news. But again, it's something that we're not often aware of, I think. Are you seeking confirmation when you're getting the news? Like that's the classic thing, was like when somebody comes and tells you and you go, oh yeah, I thought so.
Yeah.
You say afterwards,
Yeah.
that's what makes you interested in news, isn't it? Yeah, I knew that would happen. Yeah.
And
we love saying things like that about the news.
But that's why I think it's important to look at other channels and other news sources that don't necessarily share your opinion.
Yeah, I like it. I like it when I listen to different channels and I actually change my opinion. I find that very enriching. I love those experiences. When I listen, I did that last week, and
does that happen often?
Different news. Not a lot, but it happened to me last week. And
can you tell us what it was?
I was listening, of course, about the Gaza war. And of course, everybody's expressing opinions about the Gaza war. And I had my opinions at the beginning. And then last week, I've been listening to more and more and more and more. And I was listening to Israelis and I was listening to Palestinians. I get a lot of my news actually from podcasts as well. We didn't mention podcasts, but I was listening to some interviews. And then I came to the conclusion yesterday that I need to not have an opinion because I don't live there and my experience has very little to do with the experiences of these people. It's very difficult for me to understand either side. And I think it's because I'm not actually there. So I came to the conclusion that I have to really stop having an opinion about it because I didn't know enough.
Did you feel the same way about Ukraine and Russia?
No.
Because you don't live
but
there
that's
either.
Because no, but I think that in the news at the moment, we are getting a lot of, like, for example, I don't think I've actually had much Russian. Where can you listen to Russians talking about the Ukraine war? Whereas with the Palestinian and the Israeli war, there's a lot of news out there from both sides. It's much easier to find things.
I found things that were not pro-Russian, but did give the Russian perspective, the fact that they didn't want to exist next to another UN country when Ukraine seemed to be applying for UN membership.
Not UN,
not UN,
NATO.
I'm sorry, NATO membership. They didn't want to have another NATO country right on their border. And there were a few videos on YouTube that explain the history of why they went into Crimea. And there is a perspective, there is an argument for that. Obviously, they started the war and they invaded, and most people are against that. But what's interesting to me is when you watch any news channel these days, there's a good and there's a bad. There's an evil, and there's then there's us. There's
in the middle, trying to figure it out.
There's Europe and America that always do things right, and we're fighting the good fight, and then there's the bad people. And
Yeah,
that
that's
reminds
true.
me when communism was really bad in the world. And that was a horrible thing to be, a communist. And this idea of having everything black and white really,
We've got to be suspicious of
it's
it, haven't
not.
we?
There's grey areas as well in the
Absolutely.
Israeli-Palestinian crisis as well. Let's look at some comments that have come in. Yolanda, the credibility will depend on the person who's telling it. Some of them like inventing or adding some things about it according to their point of view. Yeah, exactly. I think, that's what we were saying. We agree, Yolanda, with you. To be or not to be, there's a bit of Shakespeare coming in there from Ignacio. And he also
Very
says,
deep.
I share good news. Well done for good news. And after avoid, we need a gerund. There's a gerund after avoid, an ing verb. So I avoid spreading bad news with an S. It's a question of health. Yeah.
I love that comment, Ignacio. That sounds really good to me.
we need to get a sound for comment of the day for next time.
Yeah.
I'll play a sound that, yes, comment of the day.
Yeah, definitely.
Well done, Ignacio. The result of misunderstanding is war and pain. Yeah, sadly. And Yolanda says, if the news is about a political party, sometimes you immediately know the tendency, the bias will be a good word there instead of tendency, the bias of the person speaking or the agenda of the person speaking.
No, I wouldn't. I think they're negative words that you've given there, Craig. I think what Yolanda's giving a more neutral word, maybe the political tendencies of the person speaking.
Yeah.
You need to put it in a collocation, I think. Political leanings is another word.
Yeah, better words, definitely.
Political leaning or political tendencies in plural. Okay, all right. So we've got a bit more vocabulary, haven't we? We can maybe pop up now.
Do we have time?
We've got 15 minutes, haven't we? Oh, no, we're about to finish, aren't we? I've got the time wrong, of course. I've got the time wrong. Oh, well, no more vocabulary. You'll have to go to the news and find it yourself.
Dialogue is a way to find solutions. Yeah, unfortunately, people don't listen enough, Ignacio. That's the problem. We're not listening enough. That's the problem.
Well, that's maybe because we need to discuss the news rather than just read and consume it. Maybe we need to talk about things and we don't maybe debate as much as we should.
But there's so much divisiveness and polarization going on. As I said before, you're either on one side or you're on the other. And people like to label. They put labels on people. You're in this group. You're in that group. You're with me or you're against me. There's nothing in the middle. You have to be on one side or the other, and that's part of the problem, I think.
But that's because we're not debating anymore, Craig. We're just consuming and giving our opinions all the time, and we're not very good at growing in our literacy or our education. Roberto's put a lovely final comment up there. He says, something that comes into my mind right now, that's nice, is the importance of having a good media literacy in us. Now, I wouldn't use a good media literacy, just say good media literacy, because media is it's plural, isn't it? We said medium is singular, media is plural. So you can't put it as a singular with a. So of having good media literacy in us, so it can stop us from getting stressed out by the confusing or negative things we see in the media. Sadly, not many of us have the habit of it. I think I get what where you're coming from. It is true. We're not educated to navigate the media as it is now. And many of us don't know how to do it. And it's very dangerous for young people because they are growing up in a vacuum of that. I think when I was younger, and you too, probably, Craig, we saw our parents reading newspapers. We saw our teachers reading newspapers. We knew which newspapers people read. Yeah. So, I mean, even when we were very young, we understood that there were differences in the newspapers that you bought. Uh-huh.
Yeah, they
And
were very
they
also
were
very.
either, it showed the political leanings often, and
Mhm.
that was something that you grew up with. You knew that. But of course now, because all of us are consuming news mostly in private on our phones, I don't think young people nowadays learn that. They don't, because they don't have those conversations with their parents, really, you
Mhm.
know, because everybody's watching the news or consuming the news on their own personal device, you know. The family doesn't sit around the television or the radio anymore, do they?
No.
Everybody does that individually. So I think Roberto's right, but it's probably a lack of education there as well. We need to learn about media literacy. Mm-hmm.
So come back next time in 2 weeks and we'll be able to talk about the news with you again, perhaps. If you have something you want to discuss, we could talk about a news story. We will be back in 2 weeks, but on a Thursday, not a
Yeah.
Wednesday.
Mm-hmm.
So 2 weeks from today on Thursday. And of
Mm-hmm.
course, we'll put notices up about that, the day and the time on social media, on Facebook and on X, or previously Twitter. But before we go, we'll just remind, excuse me, we'll remind you who we are and where we're from. I'm Craig from mansioningles.com, where you can study English for free, and lots of courses and material for you there. You can listen to the podcast at inglespodcast.com. And if you want to study with me in a conversation group, go to englishcraig.com, and there you can contact me for conversation online with a small group of lovely people once or twice a week. So if you're interested in that, let me know.
Mm-hmm.
Lynn?
And yeah, I'm Lynn, if you weren't here right at the beginning. My business is called Put It Like This. That's my website, putitlikethis.com. Unfortunately, my courses are not free. I'm an online teacher, but what I do is I tailor make the course for you. So if you have a specific objective in English that you'd like to achieve, then you tell me about your objective, and then I will create a course specifically to help you achieve that objective. So it could be exams, it could be you're a teacher and you want to improve pronunciation, or it could be that you want to have general English to improve your level, or business English, many different things. Go to putitlikethis.com and you can see examples of the kind of courses that I can create for you.
And
Okay.
we hope next week is full of good news for you, and you're not depressed by the news. Let's hope things improve in the world and you have a lovely week.
Yes.
So until next time, take
Uh-huh.
care, and we'll
Yeah.
say goodbye.
Take care. Thank you for participating today. Thank you. Bye-bye.
See you next time. Bye-bye.